We continue exploring the book Metaphysics by Peter van Inwagen. And this topic is externalism in contrast to idealism. In part two, we're looking at the criticisms that van Inwagen raises against idealism and in favor of externalism, which is the view of the common Western metaphysic. So, how does he argue against idealism? First of all, he considers one of the reasonings for idealism, and that was the idea of simplicity. If all you have are minds and perceptions, that seems to be a very simple metaphysic. And Van Inwagen says, well, it's not so clear that that is the case. Simplicity is not that clearly in favor of idealism, because with the common Western metaphysic, you have on the one hand objects, and then objects have properties. And that's not really that complex. And so it fits with an explanation of how we perceive things, and even you could appeal to Locke's argument about this, although Berkeley has a rationale himself with an appeal to God on why we have consistency of experiences and lack control over our experiences. But in any case, Van Inwagen argues that some properties are non-sensible properties. So what is he talking about here? He's talking about things like electrical conductivity. We cannot pick up a copper wire and look at it, feel it, taste it, touch it, smell it, whatever, and tell that it has electrical conductivity in contrast to a piece of plastic, let's say. Or certain things have a molecular structure to them that we are aware of. Those are not properties that we can sense with our minds. And so that's a problem for thinking that all properties are things that we sense in our mind. That just doesn't make sense when you talk about these properties that exist apart from our mind. In addition, as we go on to think about this, Van Inwagen says that properties are not the same thing as sensations. We have properties of the objects, and those properties cause sensations, but those are two different things. Again, this is much more how Locke viewed the world when it came to secondary qualities, at least. So we have, for example, the snowball is white, and then my sensation of it is white in a different way. So we use white in an analogous way here, kind of like we use the word healthy. So we could say something like, this granola is healthy and I am healthy, and the granola may cause me to be healthy, but these are using the word in two different ways. Even though we get the idea they belong together, they have a similar meaning. So the idea is that the whiteness of an external object is whatever property the object has that causes sensations of white in myself. And so those are two different things. They're not the same thing. It's not a sensible property in the way that Berkeley described. Instead, especially with color here, this is much more how Locke described the world. You have things that exist external to us, and they have properties, and then they cause us to experience properties. So Locke was onto something here. And finally, Van Inwagen brings up this concern about the possibility of an inverted spectrum. And it really demonstrates these claims that you have a distinction between the properties and our sensations of those properties. So let's be clear what we're talking about with an inverted spectrum. First, we'll just start with a black and white, because that's very easy to tell how this is inverted. So this is a black and white photo of a balloon, hot air balloon, and three of them, in fact. But let's just focus on the one in the middle. The main section there is black. Now we could invert this photo, and in this way, we could see that the main section is more white. And likewise with gray portions, so the stripe, second stripe up from the white portion is fairly gray, and that's relatively gray in the black and white version that's not inverted. So we have this inversion that's possible. Well, let's take this up a notch to color inversion. So this is the way that we would normally see the balloons that are filling with air and one taking off here. And we see all the various colors that exist. We could invert this as well, right? And so imagine, though, when we're looking at this, so this is the way everyone experiences it, but how do you know that your experience is the same as my experience? So in other words, let's see if we can draw something on here without making a huge mess. So that star right there, okay, we perceive it as yellow. And this section over here, we perceive as yellow. Now, imagine we're teaching colors to this little girl down here, and we ask her if she knows what the color of the star is, and she says yellow. And then we ask about the major portion of this balloon here, and she says yellow. But imagine, unknowns to us, this is what the girl is perceiving. Now notice what she's identified as yellow is here and here. Now we could ask her where there is other yellow. Now she will point to, let's say, this balloon over here and that section. Sorry about these horrible shapes I'm making, but that section there is yellow, she says. And of course, this is the way we see it. And we see that that is yellow. And we say, that's good, that's correct. Then we ask her, what color is that square below the star? And she says she doesn't know. And so we say, it's blue. That is blue. Can you find any other blue? And she points over here and she says, that's blue, right? Now what she has seen is this color here. And I don't know why it did that, but the square below the star, this is how she perceives blue. And so we asked if she sees any other blue, and she says, yes, that portion of that balloon is blue. And we say, yes, that's right. And then we say, can you identify any other blue? And she says, well, the sky is blue. And we say, of course, yes, that's correct. And then she also says, well, in this balloon over here off to the left corner, we see some blue there. And we say, very good, that is also blue. Now we could go on with green, right? She identifies this color here as green, and we say that's great. And so we say, is there any other green that you can see? And she says that stripe on that balloon right there is green. And we see this stripe here, and we say, very good. What you say is green is actually green. You're learning your colors. Now, there are all kinds of issues and points that we can make that are philosophically interesting with this concern, but you could see how this is possible, right? The girl that we've identified here might see everything as inverted, but we wouldn't even know that because she identifies her colors the way we expect her to. So, how is this going to work into an argument? Well, the possibility of an inverted spectrum, that is, perceiving an inverted spectrum, only makes sense if perceptions are distinct from the properties that cause them. Otherwise, this doesn't make sense at all, this consideration that we've had. Now, what does that mean? Well, let's draw out and be very clear about the argument then. So Van Inwagen turns this into an argument against idealism. So follow along. Now, if sensible properties, as Berkeley likes to call them, are the same as sensations that we have, right? If they're one and the same thing, if yellow is the same thing in the balloon as the perception of yellow that we have, then perceiving with an inverted spectrum is absolutely logically impossible. It just cannot happen, right? Because they're one and the same thing. They are identical, according to Berkeley. But that inverted spectrum that we talked about is possible. In fact, perceiving with an inverted spectrum is not only logically possible, it could be actual. For all we know, you or I have the perceptions of colors that are in an inverted spectrum. Maybe your best friend has an inverted spectrum perception in contrast to you. But of course, you would never know that because you all agree on pointing at things and identifying them as yellow or red or blue or green or what have you. So this could be actual. For all we know, we do, some of us, perceive the world as an inverted spectrum, the colors that we perceive. So since it's possible, sensible properties are not the same as the sensations we have. There's the property in the balloons, for example, we were looking at, and there's the sensation of those properties that we experience. Since those things are actually distinct, as we identified with that possibility of an inverted spectrum, that means they're not the same thing. And if they're not the same thing, that means idealism is incorrect. Now, if that seemed a little bit quick, keep in mind, though, that the burden of proof is on the person who rejects the common Western metaphysic, the person who says there are no external objects when our natural, so to speak, beliefs about the world is that there are external objects, and those objects cause us to have certain perceptions. So the burden of proof is on idealism to convince us that that's not the case, but we actually have an argument to convince us that externalism is the right view here. And so it seems that we have reason to reject idealism, and Van Inwagen is correct in doing so.